really special guest speaker today. This is so silly. I want to be like Dr. Shane Couch, but it's definitely Pastor Shane Couch. But hey, Doctor of Jesus, right? We got to Jesus heals. Got to have doctors for that. That's what pastors are. But yeah, can we just welcome him? This is awesome that he can be here. Well,
good afternoon, family. How are you? I get to speak at a lot of churches, and every time I step into a building and it's a church, it feels like family because we're automatically family of God, Jesus. We're all going to the same place. So even though I've only met you guys for the first time today, it really feels comfortable. I need to do something. It's a red light. Do I need to do something?
turn it. Just push it. Or turn it. Or I don't know. Just make it come on. No kidding. Is it on the patch or on the pack?
It's just a red light.
I think we got it. You want to try it?
Hello?
Darn it. Okay, just kidding.
Oh, we're going to go hand.
Not today, Satan.
Do
What?
Hello? Hello?
I have to turn it on right now.
I guess he wants it. No, it's okay.
It's all good.
Testing. There we go. All right. Okay, good to be here. Pastor Jose, let me tell you a little bit about our history together. I met him 18 years ago when I was a youth pastor. I led a missions trip to Spain, and at the time there was an organization called Shake the Nations. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that organization. But anyone who would sign up for that trip could get assigned to our team since we were going. And Jose came from another church, and he joined our team with a few other people. And so he went with us on a mission trip to Spain, and that's when I first met him. And we spent a couple weeks together ministering in Spain. And ever since then, I've seen him at district functions, and we always connect. He had me come speak at a church he was at in the West Sacramento area when he was a youth pastor down there. And it always feels like I'm seeing one of my former youth kids whenever I see him. So he feels like one of my own. So I'm really proud of him. And I know he's much older than he was 18 years ago, but he still feels like one of my youth kids. So really love that guy and his family. So I'm really glad to have this opportunity to fill the pulpit for him. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself and my family. There they are up there. I'm a blessed man, as you could tell by that picture. Sorry my wife couldn't be here. My kids had something going on at church that they needed to attend to. So that's my wife Marty, my way better half, my 150% better half. And then my oldest daughter Julia in the back, and my middle daughter Ella at my side, and my son Max right there. So my wife and I are U.S. missionaries with the Assemblies of God, and we started a ministry called Missionaries to Ministers. We've just rebranded and relaunched. Now we just call ourselves M2M, which stands for Missionaries to Ministers and Ministering to Missionaries. So we have an office in San Jose, and we provide professional counseling for people who are in the ministry, for pastors, spouses, family members, missionaries, so they can have a safe place to come, process whatever their issues are, because pastors, they're humans too, right? And they don't have a lot of safe places to go to process sensitive things, so we provide that in our office, or around the globe through technology such as Skype or FaceTime or whatever we can use to reach someone who might be halfway across the world. So we love to say our ministry is international. So that's what we do Monday through Friday. And then on the weekends, if we're called upon, we go and speak. We do seminars. We fill the pulpit. If someone needs a worship leader, I'll do that. I can fill in that way. Thank you for leading us in worship today. It was incredible. I so enjoyed that today. And so that's a little bit about what we do. I was on staff at a church for almost 17 years down in Cupertino, California. How many of you have an iPhone? Anyone have an iPhone in the bit? And it says the time in Cupertino, California, automatically on the iPhone. Well, that's because that's where Apple is. And so I was on staff at a church there for almost 17 years as a music pastor. And then my last 10 years there, I was the youth pastor. So a little bit of background on myself. So the elephant is our ministry's mascot because we say we're willing to talk about the elephant in the room, the elephant in the church, the elephant in the home. So before we get to a couple of pet elephants in my past that I've stepped around in my life, I wanted to look at a character in the Bible who had his own as well. So we're going to be looking at the life of Solomon today. So let me just say this to you right off the bat. Do not have any exceptions howevers, or neverthelesses in your life. Do not have any exceptions, howevers, or neverthelesses in your life. So the title of my sermon today is No Exceptions, Howevers, or Neverthelesses. Or the B title could be My Pet Elephants, Porn and Food. And we'll unpack that a little bit later. Now in 1 Kings, we see Solomon installed as the new king after his father David is about to die. And in chapter 3, verse 3, it says this: Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the statutes of his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. Now that's a very ugly word in this case, except. There was an exception in Solomon's life as he began his rule. Now he lived according to his father's statutes and he loved God, except he was still offering sacrifices on those detestable high places. These were not God's designated altars and were therefore inappropriate. So Solomon, as I said, began his reign as king with an exception. We can't have exceptions in our lives, friends, when it comes to serving God. These exceptions can be a chink in our armor, and they can lead to a mighty downfall as we continue to look at Solomon's life. Yet the interesting thing about Solomon's story is the Lord graciously blessed him in spite of this exception in his life. And this is where we really need to take note. The Lord still blessed him even though he had an exception in his life. Now if we keep reading, we find that God admonished Solomon to ask him for whatever he wanted, and he famously asked for wisdom, if you're familiar with that Bible story. And because of this humble request, God also blessed him with riches and favor, even with that exception in his life. And let me say this to you. Now, God's blessing you is not necessarily an indication that all is right in your soul. Are you following me? God will still bless, but it doesn't mean that everything's right. And that's more about God's graciousness and His desire to accomplish His will in spite of the vessel that He is using. I heard one minister say this: a happy church doesn't always mean a happy God. Everything can be going smoothly, life can be good, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is right. Are there any exceptions in your life? Here's a key to being upright and authentic and not having exceptions. Don't have secrets. Don't have secrets. If you want to stay strong, don't have secrets. And if you want to finish strong, don't have secrets. If you want to break through cycles of sin and bad habits, don't have secrets. Nothing good grows in the dark. Now, obtain effective accountability. Here's another way to finish strong. Obtain effective accountability. If you're not changing, then it's not effective. We all need safe people in our lives that we can share with. We all need effective accountability, and effective accountability is the type that brings about change in your life. Once I graduated Bible college and I was hired as a pastor, I knew I needed to get an accountability partner. It's in the book, Pastoring for Dummies. So, for years I confessed my junk to accountability partner, but I wasn't changing. Just having an accountability partner wasn't enough. It wasn't effective. For me, I needed professional help to bring about the change I needed in my life. So remember, if your accountability isn't bringing about significant long-term changes, then it is not effective. Now in 1 Kings chapter 10, verses 23 through 25, it says this: King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. Year after year, everyone who came brought a gift: articles of silver and gold, robes, weapons and spices, and horses and mules. Now let me just reiterate that Solomon's exception existed prior to God's gift of wisdom and wealth and all the blessing that we just read about. If we can believe or trust the timeline as Solomon's story is written out in the Bible. God's blessing was just abundant in his life with that exception there. Now, people have asked me, does God still use a pastor who is struggling with sexual sin in secret? And I say, well, yes, He does, because God is going to accomplish what He needs to accomplish in spite of the vessel. Now, it seems Solomon was still in God's favor, even though he had an exception. But once again, don't let the blessings fool you, because it is your heart in all the corners and recesses that need to be found in favor of God. So to avoid the pitfalls in your walk with God, you can't have howevers. No exceptions and no howevers. And if we skip down to chapter 11, in verse 1 we read, King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women. Amidst all his blessings, Solomon had a however. And in verse 2 it says, the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. And even in light of God's direct commands, Solomon's however turned into a nevertheless. And it says, nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. And in verse 4 we read, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. This is a sad ending to a story that was so full of great accomplishments and divine blessings. Don't let the accomplishments and blessings you may be experiencing blind you to the exceptions that you may be glossing over. Is there a chink in your armor? Is the word accept an ugly word in your life? Are you in danger of a however becoming a nevertheless? The saddest ending that can be written to a person's story is that their heart was not fully devoted to God. So sometimes we can't see an exception in our lives because of denial. Denial is what keeps elephants sitting in our living rooms. We live with a big smelly mammoth because we're convinced it's easier to step around it rather than do the hard work of removing it and being free of it. Now let me explain denial to you. You can't tell someone who's in denial that they're in denial, because being in denial is going to make them deny that they're in denial. Truth? But denial helps us avoid painful truths. Follow me. Denial helps us avoid painful truths. We develop it when we're young. It's a coping mechanism. And we keep it close in adulthood because we think it's working for us. Now let me give you an example out of my life. When I was in junior high, it was picture day at school, but I hadn't showered that day. Even though biologically my body was telling me, you need to shower every day. I didn't shower that day. So I went to school, went to the gym where we were all lined up, and keep in mind gymnasiums have great acoustics for later. And I'm trying to mold my greasy hair into a presentable position for the camera, for my picture. And I knew I should have showered. Then this kid standing in front of me named Mark Holbrook. Are any of you related to Mark Holbrook? He looks at me and he says, your hair is greasy, greasy, greasy. And my immediate response was, no it's not. Because Mark embarrassed me. He humiliated me. And I immediately went into denial and said, no, it's not. He confronted me with a painful, what? Truth. I knew it was true. But it was embarrassing. And he humiliated me, so I went into denial and said, no, it's not. That's how denial works. Now I'm going to give you a few examples of exceptions and howevers in my life. My pet elephants. But I want you to remember something, and I say this everywhere that I go. We're all broken people. We just have different details. Each one of us is broken. We just have different details. So I'm going to share with you some of my details. They might not be your details, but we're all broken people. We just have different details. So I was on staff at a church in Cupertino, California, as I said, for many years. And the majority of those years, I was stuck because of denial and justification. Now, I was a good youth pastor. I was a good minister of music, except, there's that ugly word, except I was dealing with pornography behind the scenes. I was preaching about sexual purity to my youth group and what God expects around that. However, there's that ugly word, however, I was struggling to remain sexually pure myself. But God forgave me, and I would constantly be asking God for forgiveness, and that's how I was able to go on, because I would mess up and ask God for forgiveness, and that's how I was able to preach on a Wednesday night to the youth group, or that's how I was able to lead worship on Sunday morning, because I asked God for His forgiveness, and I knew He forgave me, and He does, He forgives us. But my concept of God's forgiveness kept me stuck. Not God's forgiveness, my concept. Because I kept asking for forgiveness and I knew I received it, but there was something missing. And it's a little word called freedom. There's a lot of Christians that walk around in a lot of forgiveness, but not a lot that walk around in forgiveness and freedom. And that was me. I was walking around in a lot of forgiveness, but not a lot of freedom. So I had exceptions and howevers in my ministry, but thank God they were finally dealt with when my denial and my justifications were just blown to pieces. And out of my brokenness and healing is where our ministry was born. Because I finally got to the point where I couldn't stand the hypocrisy anymore. And I told my wife everything that she didn't know about my secret struggles. And I don't recommend doing that. I just didn't know any better. So I told her everything. I filled in all the blanks. And we started a long journey of recovery and of healing. And as I began to heal, my desire to help other people began to grow. And that's how our ministry started, is specifically helping pastors and spouses that may be dealing with a sexual addiction issue. And that is why we do what we do. And we hear heavy stories. There are many hurting ministry families out there. And unfortunately, by the time they get to our office, they're in damage control mode. So my hope and prayer for you today is that you won't have to get to damage control mode. And may you be divinely aware today of your exceptions in your life, especially in the midst of blessings, because that can trick us and fool us. And may there be no howevers, and may there never be a nevertheless written about you. However, we got a picture I want to show. This was me a few years back. It seemed as I was getting one area under control, my sexual addiction issues, I was having an issue in another. I'm also broken around food. As I said, we're all broken people, we just have different details. So that was about 40 pounds ago. Now some people use sexual acting out to cope, some people gamble, and some people use alcohol, and some shopping, and others may be riddled with anger, and some blame, and some struggle with unforgiveness. But food became a big problem for me. Now, I felt like my eating habits never matured. You're supposed to grow up and start eating more salads, right, instead of junk food. Well, that wasn't me. I didn't like salads. I didn't like things that were green. So it was as if my four main food groups were sugar, flour, fast food, and soda. So I've always loved sugar, and I've always had to have something sweet after dinner or after lunch. And sometimes if I had something sweet first, then I'd want something salty. It was that cycle. Now, I'm not going to share my whole story and history around eating, but leading up to this picture, it was getting out of control. Well, what am I saying, getting out of? It was out of control. It was like I was having an affair with Taco Bell. Now, did any of you own a Taco Bell franchise in here? Because I preached this at a church before, and I said Taco Bell, and then one of the associate pastors said, "We have someone who owns a Taco Bell franchise." Try not to mention Taco Bell at second service. So no one owns a Taco Bell, we're all good? Okay.
We're all good.
All right. But it seriously was like I was having an affair with Taco Bell. Unless I wanted Wiener Schnitzel, but I had to make it there before midnight because they close at midnight. So this is why it was like an affair. It had all the elements. Because I would wait until my wife went to bed. And then I would wait long enough to think that she's in a deep enough sleep to not hear me sneak out of the house. And I would go through the garage and then the side door, and I'd get in the car, I wouldn't turn the headlights on because I didn't want them to shine in my girls' windows so they could be like, oh, where's Dad going at midnight? You know, so then I'd pull away, and sometimes I would stop by Walgreens and get some candy first, and then I would drive through whatever drive-through I wanted that night, and I would get a meal and a half. And like I said, it's late at night, 12:30 at night, and I would come home and I would spread out the food on the floor and turn the TV on, and I would just begin to feed my pain. I would just feed my pain. And I was starting to do this 3-4 times a week. And it got to the point where I started looking forward to it. When I got up in the morning, I would get excited about my alone time with my mistress, junk food. And I would feed my pain. Now this picture we took as a group of pictures that we were taking for our Christmas cards that year. But this one wasn't going to make the cut. There's no way. The one that made the cut had a kid like right in front of me to hide everything. Because I was trying to cover it up. But there was no covering it up. It's there. It was an issue. Now, as I said, you know, I was a good pastor. I was a good youth pastor, good music pastor, and I was a good husband, and I was a good father, except, there's that ugly word, except, I had a problem with food. I had an unhealthy relationship with food. And I had tried to come up with my own food plans in the past. I was going to exercise and eat right. Yeah, I did the Atkins diet one time. I joined gyms. I tried being accountable with other people with my food plan, but that lasted like a minute. And I even tried to sober myself up by drawing my headstone in my journal and saying, if you don't get it together, this could be your future. Because it wasn't just about being overweight. My blood pressure was so high. My triglycerides were literally off the charts. I was having a hard time tying my shoes. I was having a hard time getting out of our chair and a half. And it would make me lose my breath. I wasn't healthy. And trying to do it on my own wasn't working. I had to go to a group. I needed to tell my secrets around my eating. I needed to say prayers with other group members. I needed to get a sponsor and submit to somebody else's plan because my plans were failing me time and time again. And that program was Overeaters Anonymous. You make your own plans and you change the details. Do you realize that's true? If you make your own plans, then you'll change those plans as you feel you want to as time goes by. You set your own boundaries, you're going to move those boundaries eventually. So I needed to surrender my control to God. And as I said, I needed to submit to a sponsor that knew the pain I was going through and someone who had had success in this area that could walk me through it. Had I not, my nevertheless could have been dying prematurely from a heart attack. So I ask you one more time, church. Are there any exceptions in your life today? Are there any howevers? Are they leading to a great big nevertheless? So as I speak to you today, God wants to see hearts being stirred. He wants His children to be free from cycles of sin that are killing His children's soul. I have had people sit on my couch in my office and tell me things that they have never told another living soul. And they had every intention of taking that secret to the grave. But that was the problem. Because of their spirit already had one foot in the grave. The wages of sin is death, right? As the Bible teaches us. So if we are struggling with a habitual and cyclical sin and we believe the Bible is true, something is dying. So I want to try and break through any denial that may be present in this room. Do you have a secret that you swore to take to the grave? Shame keeps us stuck. Shame keeps us stuck. We need to learn to transform shame into remorse and then let that remorse move us forward. I read a great book in regards to sexual addiction issues. It's called Unwanted. And he shares the story of one of the cameramen who films for Shark Week on the Discovery Channel. And this cameraman was asked this question. He says, what do you do when a great white shark starts swimming towards you? And the cameraman said, you have to do something that's kind of counterintuitive. You have to start swimming directly towards the shark with your camera. because it messes with the shark's defense mechanism. Sharks are used to things swimming away from them in the ocean. So that's what you have to do, something that's counterintuitive. So when I'm talking about shame, we usually try and run from shame. And we usually try to run from something that's going to comfort us in an unhealthy way. We need to turn around and face our shame. Call it what it is. Face it in the power of Jesus. Stare it down and tell it doesn't have any power over us anymore because of God's forgiveness in our life. So I am all about throwing out lifelines to people who are sinking. And that is why I tell my story of brokenness, so it will connect with yours and show you that there is hope. So there's healing to be had. Now, I don't do the things I did before. Looking at porn and all that goes along with that. I don't sneak out at night anymore and drive through fast food restaurants anymore. God's changed me. And it's because of that beautiful thing called recovery and God's power in my life. So there is healing to be had. I'm so thankful that I'm not the same person. As I'm wrapping up, I had a father call me, devastated because his son was arrested because of his sexual addiction issues. And as I listened to this broken-hearted father on the phone, and I waited with him as he was sobbing and pausing, and when he needed to gain his composure, and it was time for me to speak, I said this: it's time for healing to begin. I say that to every one of my clients that I begin to see. It's time for healing to begin. I don't know why it didn't happen sooner. I'm just glad it didn't happen later. But it's time for healing to begin. So I hold out hope to you today. We're all broken people. We just have different details. It's time for healing to begin. So do not have any exceptions. Do not have any howevers. And never let your story end with a nevertheless. Can I pray with you today, church? Lord, I thank you for the hope that comes in knowing you. I thank you, Lord, for the fact that we don't just sing songs about freedom, we can live in freedom. God, and I believe there's people in this room that you want to be living in forgiveness and freedom. I believe there's people in this room that need to take care of those exceptions. They need to deal with those howevers so they can avoid a nevertheless. So Lord, just begin to stir hearts. Just begin to work. Do what only you can do in this place today. God, minister. Minister, minister. There's hope. There's hope to be held out today. There's healing to be had. There's a better that's yet to come. Lord, that's my story. I know it's true. And I believe it's true for every person in this room as well. Whatever the issue may be. Whatever the brokenness may be. So I pray, God, that you'll take it from here. Whatever happens in the next few moments, whatever happens as we leave this place, whatever happens on Monday, I pray, God, that you'll take it from here. Take it from here, God. Take it from here. Whatever needs to happen beyond these moments, take it from here. Do what only you can do. Do what only you can do, God. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Just wait a few minutes on the Lord and see what He wants to do. Is there an exception? You may be very blessed, but is there an exception? Is there a corner of your heart that God's wanting to fine-tooth comb over? Is there a however? I love God, however, there's this. Just take that inventory and let God shine His light where it needs to shine. And know that that's a good thing. It'll only bring about health. It'll only bring about true freedom. And if He's showing you something today, ask Him what you need to do about it tonight. Ask Him what needs to be done about it tomorrow and on Tuesday. Don't just feel convicted on Sunday afternoon and then forget about it. If God's really doing some work, showing you something, keep asking Him, Lord, what should I do about this? Show me. Strengthen me. Thank you, Lord God. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for what you're doing. It's only going to result in good and in health if it's from you. So we thank you for that, God. It is in Jesus' name I pray these things.
Thank you, Pastor, for your words today. I think it's hard sometimes when we think about God, we think love, which is totally what He is, but having to face those harsh truths and realize where we fall short and just the way you put it. I know I'm convicted for sure today, but I'm grateful for that. today. I know that we're a family here, and I know that there are a couple people that I know of that are hurting right now. And I was just hoping we could come together and just kind of pray over them before we leave today. Valerie and Carla, would you guys come up here? Valerie just learned that her brother has cancer, and she's really struggling. And my mom is dealing with some health issues right now, sorry. So if we could just put our hands on them today and pray. If anyone feels God leading them to pray, let's just be here for each other. And if anybody else needs prayer today, we're all here to do that for one another.